What's funny is that, we've been coming here for like 12 years or so. And I remember we started talking about sort of changes in the industry and potentially the impact of like artificial intelligence and new technologies and how that might affect the industry. And I'm surprised. I was not predicting sort of the pace of change. Like there's been sort of a bit of a, this isn't, anything novel, but it's been much more rapid than I had expected. And what's sort of interesting is it does sort of map into like a machine learning idea of concept drift. And so when we're doing machine learning, or when you're trying to learn a model for some sort of decision problem, so we're taking data and then we're trying to represent it into sort of a compact representation that we can use. One of the things that one needs to be cognizant of is this, the idea of concept drift, which is we build the model, we build our representation based upon the data as it was, right? But sometimes the environment changes in a much more radical way than it has in the past. There's a shift, there's a drift. And so what we built our representation on, our model that we're using to make decisions, is based on data that is no longer a representation of the way things are now. And that's what's known as concept drift. It's like, does the distribution of data, is it changing out from underneath us? And so that's something that one needs to be cognizant of. That's usually why when you use them, sometimes when people use models in sort of marketing or in business, they need to be refreshed. They're perishable, especially when there's this concept drift, when things are changing over time. You have, it's known as sort of non-stationary data. There's a shift. And so if you're using the model off of the older data, it's no longer going to be very effective, right? And so you need to be open, you need to start learning newer things, you need to go back and start sampling from the environment more, you need to like collect more data. And you now need to like forget. So part of learning is forgetting, actually. You need to start forgetting things in order to learn new things, right? Because you don't want to keep structure that's no longer useful, right? And as things change, those representations, that model of the world is no longer pertinent. It's not helpful anymore. And I think we're in like the real world right now, we're in one of those moments where we have this concept drift. So a lot of the things that were maybe valuable or reasonable models or representations and that we were using to guide our decision making, I think perhaps we need to be open to the fact that actually we need to start maybe forgetting some of the things or some of the skills or some of the ways of working or the ways of being. And I think that's part of the uncertainty there, is like trying to know what is the newer model. And I think because there's so much change right now, it's going to be very difficult in the next year, 2 years, or what have you. I really don't know. That's part of it, is what is going to be a good working model. And I think we all have to be much more open to the fact that whatever models we have or whatever modes of decision making that we currently have needs to be more flexible perhaps than in the past. And we also have to not grieve, but let go perhaps of many of the things that we had sort of held to be true perhaps in the past. And we need to be open to the fact that maybe some of those things that we thought were quite important, and in part I use as part of our identity, like we sort of define ourselves sometimes and like what we do and how we do them, some of those things we might have to say goodbye to. I don't want to use the word half-baked, but I think it is important to reevaluate what is useful, because like there's this the all models are wrong but some are useful. That's from George Box in his 76 paper, Science and Statistics. But really the whole point of the all models are wrong, some are useful, that's not like an excuse just to like be dismissive. Actually it's very insightful, I think. And it's like it's really, since all models are wrong, because they're just representations of reality. You can't know, you're not omniscient, you can't know reality, of course. It's just you have an internal representation. And so really what it is, we should be deciding those representations based upon what's useful. It's what's useful for making decisions and operating. So it's really about utility. it's really about maximizing utility, not maximizing truth, because you can't really have a true model. So forget about trying to like optimize for that, and optimize for what's useful. And now it's sort of uncertain what models are going to be useful, and I think it is somewhat uncomfortable, but it leads to a lot of opportunity. I do think one of the general skills that is going to be extremely valuable is the capacity to diagnose. So I think it's been always very useful to be able to diagnose problems. So it's like you need to understand the context of this business, what are the business needs, and then try to think through what are likely, once we know the problem, like what's important, understanding the incentive structure in which the decisions are going to be made, but also to be able to diagnose solutions. And I think in the short term, especially while people are trying out new technology, it'll be very important to sort of relearn what one expects from technology. So currently, when we use technology, they're more deterministic systems. So when we're using software or whatnot, you give it an input, you're going to get the same output back all the time, right? So it's deterministic. It's a function that there's just a mapping, a direct mapping. And it's correct in that it's been validated, and you can be fairly sure, outside of some bugs or whatnot, sure if I put in 2 + 2, I'm going to get 4 back, right? And that's just assumed, and so there's that expectation when we're using software or using technology, computer technology, that it's going to behave that way. But what is, I think, currently at least fundamentally different is that the new types of software, the AI, the SI, they're not deterministic, right? They're sort of stochastic, and which means that any given time you might give it the same input, you potentially will get different output. So 1, you're going to get different outputs, and 2, you can be less confident that the result will be correct, especially when it's something about something factual. And that can be okay as long as one is cognizant that that's the nature of the beast, let's say, and we don't accidentally, sort of this idea of external validity is to like transport learnings from one context, whether or not they transport to another context. And I think a potential, I don't know, risk is the right word, but a relearning is to frame the context properly, which is when we're using some of these technologies, to not have the same assumptions that we have previously had when we were using pre-AI software, right? And we might potentially assign too much authority to results from some of these AI technologies, because we expect it to be deterministic, because we've sort of trained and we have that. I don't know if it's even innate. I just think the way humans interact with technology, there's this implicit assumption that there's a correctness to it, and I think that's something that'll be a challenge to navigate that as we're using new software, and to be aware enough and to have the ability to diagnose solutions. So in the past, very important to diagnose problems. Now it's going to be also very important to be able to diagnose the results and be able to, how should I put it? What's the right way to say? How to diagnose it'll be important to already know not the exact answer, but the shape of the answer, if you know what I mean. So you'll get results, and you'll need to be able to get a sense, know enough that the form of the answer is correct to evaluate it. And so I think there's in the past, maybe you didn't need to be an expert to interpret output, and now I do think you need to have some expertise and background knowledge to interpret results, at least currently. And so I think having more, let's say, more the right way to say this? It'll be more and more valuable to have underlying mental abstractions and concepts that one can use to help interpret and diagnose both problems and solutions, perhaps in a way that one maybe didn't need. And I almost think this could be sort of not the Empire Strikes Back, but the liberal arts strike back, the liberal arts education. Maybe that'll become more valuable now, ironically, through the shift in technology. Whereas the specialization or the sort of the work in STEM may have less direct payoff for many folks. Maybe having a much better grounding in like the liberal arts and having a broad understanding of base level ideas, not base, but fundamental concepts might actually be a very good foundation going forward. I don't know, but of course I don't know. That's the whole point. It's difficult to know.
And critical skills, maybe.
Yeah, I think maybe critical skills are going to be maybe less technical and maybe more fundamental concepts and abstractions. To be able to, in your own mind, model whether or not the results, the working with AI is to evaluate its robustness or its not just efficacy, but its, what's the word, validity or nature, and just, I don't want to ascribe agency or autonomy to it, but I just mean its veracity. For me, it's been quite useful in certain domains where I'm trying to like think through a problem, and I've been using it almost like going to an expert that I know in the field, let's say. And instead of calling them up and say, hey, I've been thinking about this problem this way, and I think that there's a relationship between this type of approach, this type of statistical problem, and this other concept, right? There's some sort of like when I was talking about in my talk, between the use of this idea of certain types of complexity and the complexity of our models, and how we might evaluate the marginal complexity. Should we use a simpler model, or should we use the more complex model? And I was thinking, I think that might be similar. The idea of just a workhorse approach. In this case, the F-test. That's a sort of very standard, nothing exotic or sexy about it, just a workhorse approach. And I was like, but it's interesting, maybe thinking about that as a way of assessing, using the idea of the F-test as thinking about it, framing it as running a test on the marginal effective complexity of the model. So I'm evaluating two models, and one I have a bigger one, and now I have a subset of it. Do I need these extra bits? Do I need to be cognizant of these extra bits of the environment in order to make a better decision, or will they provide basically the same result? And just the idea of using, it's known as a partial F-test. It's a little technical, and it doesn't really matter, I guess, for this conversation, but just using the statistical technique, I guess, and to link those two. And so, I was like, does that make sense? And I used some AI to help me think about it in almost like rubber ducking a little bit, right? And so, as opposed to using somebody as a soundboard, I may not have access to somebody who knows about regression or F-tests or anything, or hasn't really thought too much about Kolmogorov complexity versus Gelman's effective complexity, or how things might underneath be linked, or if there's any paths between them that one might find useful. Again, maybe not true, but maybe it's a useful way to think. And I have found using AI has been quite helpful for me to help me think through possible connections between things, or whether that's a reasonable way of thinking about it. So that can be extremely useful. But again, it does, at least in my case, it does require having some sort of coming to it with good understanding already of the concepts and of the ideas in order for it to be useful to me. The responses, if it was, I knew nothing about it, one, I wouldn't be able to answer the question, ask the question in the first place, but two, I wouldn't be able to interpret and know whether or not the result made sense or not. Or so I think currently right now, at least for me, that's, I think as an analyst, it's a great tool, almost like office hours. I treat it like office hours when you're in university and you can go and talk to the professor. And just being aware that the professor in this case may not know, could be wrong. It may not be like an oracle, but might help you think about how to draw distinctions between different concepts, or whether or not potentially there's relationships between concepts. So for that, I think it's quite useful. But it's not useful for solve this problem for me or give me this result. And I know a lot of folks seem to be using it for automation. Again, there's a lot of use of it for automating. I'm not sure how that, again, I don't really know how that will unfold. I'm sure there's a lot of efficiencies. I do worry about what you're signaling to others when you're automating certain tasks. Sometimes some of the utility or the value of an experience is its provenance. It's like hospitality. When you come and when you realize, oh, somebody's really put a lot of effort. Well, they saw me and I said something, and that maybe there's like a note, and there's maybe like maybe you say, oh, you're just walking by and you note that they have some nice wine, or whatever happens to be. And then maybe you find the bottle of wine in your room, or the server pours you, and something has been personalized because they've been listening and they've been attentive to you. So there's like the service, but then there's the hospitality component. It's like they care about not just the technical delivery of the experience, but also how it makes you feel. And a lot of times, how you feel about something is as important, if not more important, than the technical delivery of it. And I do wonder, in those contexts, sometimes the provenance of it is what's important. It's somebody else. There's almost like a human connection there. And if it's just something that's has been delegated, perhaps the sense is that they're telling you how important you are to them by they've delegated it away to something. And so perhaps sometimes there might be a loss of intimacy. So if you've made a mistake, but but let's say you the host has made a mistake, but that's an opportunity for you to come in and solve it. Now, the consumer, they need to be open to that, of course, but that's where real intimacy and relationship actually can be formed. If you haven't delivered on something, but it wasn't in bad faith, right? So if you haven't delivered, but it's because of your indifference, you've automated it away, and you in a way can signal you don't really care so much about them as human beings.
And that's a sign.
Correct. And you make a mistake. There's an error. That might be alienating, more so. I mean, it'll depend upon the person, of course, and people think of things different. But if they know it wasn't in bad faith, you were in good faith trying to get them what they want, and then they say, this is not what I wanted. There's an error here. There's an error in the technical delivery, but there isn't potentially an error in the hospitality of it. And then you can come back and say, oh, it's mine. Yes, of course. And then make it right. That can often forge a stronger intimacy and loyalty or whatever you want to call it. And I don't know if that maybe is lost, but I guess it really depends upon the context. But I do think, in some respects, it's incredibly, obviously it'll be incredibly useful. I have already found it to be incredibly useful, and I'm not, even though I studied artificial intelligence, and even though I'm in technology, we really try not to fetishize it. And I think that is a risk, in that there is a lot of lack of intentionality perhaps on usage. And so there's a lot of usage. There's a lot of, I need to use it. And using something to explore it, to understand how it might work, is still an explicit, like if you're intentional about it, it's like, we're going to try some technology. These are the outcomes. We want to learn where it can fail, where it might be useful, what have you. That's fine. But if it's just everyone's using it right now, we're sort of in a panic, it's about signaling, sort of mindless signaling, and we're using it. We're being told everyone has to use it. That is the door to massive resource misallocation, I believe, and two things. One, just total misallocation of resources, because you're spending your time on this as opposed to doing maybe non-AI things that would actually provide value. But two, you're probably also not, there's opportunity cost in that you haven't really learned, you haven't really thought about the best way of using this technology, and so you won't in the future get anything out of what you've learned, and even in the AI space. So you're just kind of going to be a double loser potentially in that context. And so I think it'll be very difficult, or one must be mindful and not just have agency and make decisions that are good for the organization, and not let external opinion and external influence permeate too much on how you're behaving, right? So one really should behave the benefits of the organization, and of course, especially of one's customers, if you're in that type of environment, and not just, it's almost like Sartre's waiter in a little bit, which is like, not be the waiter or be the business. Don't play the business and play AI. If you're going to use it, think about it and be in the moment and use it in a way that is appropriate, as opposed to play acting at using the technology. And I am a little bit concerned, especially when I hear a lot. Concern is the wrong word. I just think one should be mindful and not let external influences sort of lead one astray. But there is a ton of opportunity, and there is a ton of risk, or at least it feels that way. And so I don't know, but I do think there'll be a lot of noise, I think, and a lot of uncertainty. And so it's really like real life decision making under uncertainty. And so I think we have two things. There's this joint problem in reinforcement learning, at least, and I think it's a reasonable analogy here, where there's a shift in the environment, which we've learned, like we all kind of have our existing models of the world. There's likely a shift happening. I think we can safely say that. And so now we have this joint problem of making decisions using our internal our model, but now we also have to explore more to relearn and reconstruct or modify our internal models and our representations. And so we have this joint learning problem, which is one, sort of learning the general context we're operating in, and then two, also learning sort of the optimal decisions we should make given that. And so it's just a much more difficult problem, but potentially there's a lot more opportunity for some folks. Even in the generative AI stuff is like super productive, super useful in sort of reorganizing the internet in a way, really. And so it's surprisingly impressive for at least certain technical things that I'm asking about, it's at a fairly high level. Again, now I feel more comfortable. Oh, what is is it Gelman? I think even related Gelman, Murray Gelman, the one who was talking about effective complexity. I think he also has something that's related to the newspaper, like it's a paradox. I think it's the Gelman paradox. Could be wrong. You read, maybe it's like this. Maybe not, but maybe it is. You read. I think the story goes is that you read an article in the newspaper, right? And the newspaper, in this analogy, is the AI. Okay. You read this story. You know about the subject. You're an expert in it. You read the story, the reporter gets it wrong. It's like, this is ridiculous. They don't know what they're talking about. The conclusion's totally wrong. Bunk. You turn the page, and now you read stories about articles you don't know anything about. Gelman amnesia, I think that's what it is. And right when you turn the page and you start reading the other article, and now I'm showing my age, I guess, because now you wouldn't turn a page, you'd scroll or what have you, or you'd click or whatnot. You forget that the story was full of errors, and you read a story that you know nothing about, and you trust it. And it's like, oh wow, I can't believe that. And you either get worked up or whatever, and it's like you assign it to be completely true, or you don't question the rest. And I think that's analogous to AI right now. You get a result back, and I've seen results, and it's like, no, that's not quite right. In general, it may be right, but that's not right. But maybe when you query with things that you don't know about, you assign truthfulness to it or veracity to it. And so maybe it's like I believe it's the Gelman paradox, amnesia. I think it's amnesia, from newspapers and articles and assigning authority to content. I think maybe it's similar, and I think it's important. So it's important not to have that amnesia when you're using AI. But it's the amnesia. It's more just remembering that experience when you've seen it hallucinate, or you've seen results that are not factually correct, to transport that over to other contexts where you're not expert, and to have the same level of skepticism, perhaps, at least for now. And I'm sure for a while, and I think this will be very difficult to not let external opinions or pressure to use it override one's own good judgment about where and when it's appropriate, and to be thoughtful about it. But I don't know anyone really knows, so I think that's what would be. I would feel foolish, I think, to be too certain. But again, maybe someone has some clear insight on where everything's going. I'm older, and so all of the AI I learned is really from the convexity. The AI was like a lot of convexity stuff. So before the deep neural nets became as productive as they are now, as a way of sort of aggregating or compressing in a useful way, sort of the internet and information. So it's interesting.